Thanking our sponsors for today. Today's sponsors are Talmud Torah sponsors for the month are Paul and Kathy Pollack. In honor of their grandchildren, may they all grow up to be the best version of themselves, and may you have tremendous nachas from all of them. Daf Yomi is sponsored in the schus for refuah shlema for Yehuda Ben Michal, the son of our devoted shir member and Maggid Shir of Akiva Kovacs. And once again, a reminder, he is making a bris this morning at approximately 7:45 at Rabbi Golfez's shul. Week of Learning is sponsored by Gail and Doug Stanger. Again, Mazel Tov to Akiva, Leib, Weinberg and his bar mitzvah. Mazel Tov from Bubbie and Safta. Daf Yomi today is sponsored by Sonia Kozlovsky and the entire Kozlovsky family. They sponsored today's daf for a zechus for a successful surgery for refuah shlema for their spouse, father, or grandfather, Baruch Fishel ben Rachel, as he undergoes orthopedic surgery this morning. May the zechus of Baruch Fishel's father, Aryeh ben Baruch, who was instrumental in starting our shul's Daf Yomi, lead to refuah shlema for Baruch Fishel, as well as for Yehuda Ben Michal Kovacs and all Bnei Yisrael requiring such refuah. Indeed, the zechus of our Talmud Torah should serve as a zechus. Thank you for Baruch Fishel, and you should have a successful surgery and a successful refuah. V'soch sh'archa Yisrael. Today's daf is daf Lamed Vav. We are going to be picking up on daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis from the two dots Tan Rabbanan Arayis Ushnios LaArayis. The Gemara begins as follows: Tan Rabbanan. Our Rabbanan of Toras, Arayos Vishnios LaArayos, which means Arayos, forbidden relationships, and secondary forbidden relationships. We're not going to define that just yet, because the Gemara is going to define that very soon. But any of those relationships, if a person is Ma'anes or Mafate, Ma'anes literally means a person forces this woman into a relationship. Mafate is a case of seduction, where a person seduces the woman into a relationship. The halacha is lo ein lahen lo knas v'lo pitoy. The general rule is that these knasos, these fines, these penalties are only relevant to a person who is a basula, and therefore in these cases, as well, these cases are forbidden relationships. In these cases, the halacha is there's no knas and there is no pitoy. Now, just a word of note with regard to the term ein lahem lo knas v'lo pitoy. Almost all of the Rishonim are bothered by the description of ein lahem lo knas v'lo pitoy, because they're two different things. Knas is a penalty. Both an ones, a girl who was forced into a relationship, and a mefata, a relationship where she was convinced into this relationship, there's knas. Pitoy is the description of the action. So when it says ein lahem lo knas v'lo pitoy, it seems to be saying there's no fine, there's no penalty, and no pitoy. So the Rishonim will talk about it. But again, if you look at Tosfos over here, he points out istigaras v'lo onis, mishum de pitoy nami knasu. But again, I don't want to get into the answer because it goes in so many different directions. But let's just understand at this point, the Gemara means to say that there's no knas for both those cases, whether it was an ones or it was a case where she was seduced. Ailinus, an ailinus is a girl who is determined she can't have any children. Ein la lo knas v'lo pitoy. Again, if someone is ma'anes her or someone is mefater her, there's no fine. V'hayotze mishum shemra, a girl who goes out because of a terrible name that was spread about her, which means that it was said about her, her husband married her, they got married, and they engaged in their relationship on the first night, and he claimed that she was not a basula as she was supposed to be, and therefore she had to leave the marriage. The halacha is if someone is ma'anes, mafata that girl, there is no knas. So now the Gemara asks a question. Mai arayos umai shnios larayos. I skipped something.
Yeah.
I skipped b'ma'enes. Let's go back. Arayos. The shnios larayos. Nobody pointed it out to me. Arayos, Shnios LaArayos, forbidden relationships, there is no knas. Ein lahem lo knas lo pitoy hamima'enes. A case of mima'enes, ein la lo knas lo pitoy. I knew I skipped something because this morning when I learned this, I had a kasha on this, and I looked it up in the Rishonim, and I saw that every one of the Rishonim asked the question, and therefore even brought the Sefer Shittim Kubetzes. As I was going through the Gemara, I was thinking, how come I didn't come to that question? And the reason is because I skipped it. So what's a mima'enes? A mima'enes is somebody, a girl whose father or brother married her off as a ketana. The halacha is they're allowed to marry her off with this kedushin d'Rabbanan. And a mima'enes is a woman who says, I don't want this anymore. She walks out. She storms out of the marriage. So the halacha is, if somebody is ma'anes, or someone who's mefata that girl, the halacha is, there is no knas. Now, the problem over here is, and Tosfos even asked the question on the page, if she is a mima'enes, by definition, that means she was married. Right? She was married. Now, if she was married, the assumption is that she did things that married people do, and therefore she's not a basula. So why do you have to say she's not, that there's no knas because she's a mima'enes? That's just an external detail which is describing that she's not a basula. So the Rishonim, almost all the Rishonim over here, I'm just looking in the Shittim Kubetzes. He quotes Rashi, he quotes the Ramban, he quotes the Ritva. I'm just going to quote he quotes the Rashba as well, but I'm just quote one of the explanations from the Rishonim to explain this, to make it make a little more sense. But again, there's a number of different approaches to this. And the Rosh writes, V'nir lefaresh mima'enes she'ansa ba'ala. Who is the one who forced her into this relationship? It was her own husband. Opita osa, or he seduced her, kishahosa omedes tachtav kodem miyun. So it's talking about a case where he himself was the one who was ma'anes her. So again, that's the chiddush. The chiddush is that there is no knas even in those cases. The halach is ein lo knas lo pitu v'lo arminon kiven shemiana igloi milsa shlohosa ishtay. We don't say, in other words, the chiddush over here is that when she walks out, she storms out of the marriage, it doesn't indicate that retroactively they were never married. But again, the Rishonim go in many different directions. Some say it's talking about a case where they never engaged in intimate relations. Why? Because she was a ketana, and it was known that she has the ability to be able to walk out of the marriage at any point in time, so therefore didn't invest all that much in the marriage. But again, there's so many different approaches. But again, the simple understanding is that since she is a mima'enes, she is no longer a basula, and then the Rishonim go in many different directions. So quickly, we'll run through this Gemara again. Mima'enes ein leknas lo pitoy. Islandess, a girl who can't have children, ein leknas lo pitoy. An islandess, a girl who cannot have children, there is no knas lo pitoy. What happens over there? An islandess is a girl who skips the stage of nairos. Remember, this parak is called elu nairos, because we're describing girls who reach that stage of nairos. When is that? The halacha is a girl starts off as a ketana, and then she goes through approximately a 6-month period of nairos, and then she reaches the period of bogeres. This parak is referring to a girl who's in that 6-month period, which is approximately 12 to 12 and a half. Now, an islandess is a girl who does not develop the signs of being an adult. So she skips that whole stage of being a naira, and therefore there's not going to be any relevant knas. In other words, she goes straight from being a ketana to being a bogeres, and she skips the stage of nairos. The next case was hayotzas mishum shemra. This is a girl who goes out of the marriage. She exits the marriage because of a shemra, because her husband discovered on the first time that they were intimate that she was unfortunately mizana tachtav. So he spreads the word about her that she was mizana during their marriage, and she leaves the marriage as a result of that. Now the Gemara asks a question: Maya rayos umay shnios la rayos. What are these arayos, these forbidden relationships, and what are the secondary relationships? The Gemara says, Ilema, if you're going to suggest, we're going to the top of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph now. Arayos means arayos mamish, and as Rashi says, hamafurish bachrimos. In other words, they're the ones that are written in the pasuk. And shnios, what are shnios? Midivrei sofrim. They are relationships that are forbidden, but they are only forbidden midrabanan. And Rashi says, kagon aim imo, like a grandmother, or aim aviv, grandmother from both sides. Now, it's important to point out, obviously, these cases are not talking about where a person was ma'anes, a grandmother. because the grandmother is not going to be a naira. And we know the halacha is that all these halachas are only relevant if it's somebody who is a basula. A grandmother, by definition, can't be a basula. Rashi is just pointing out examples of somebody who would be a arayis midrabanan. He doesn't mean that these cases are talking about a grandmother. So Gemara says, if you're going to suggest that shnios l'arayis means they are secondary prohibitions because they are midrabanan, hold on a second. Since, from the Torah's perspective, they can stay married, amai ein lahen knas. Remember, at the beginning of the parak, we explained that the criteria for there being a knas, for there being a financial penalty, is that you could technically fulfill the pasuk of v'lo sia leisha. That if somebody engages in this relationship with this girl, one of the penalties are that he should actually now have to pick her up and marry her and stay with her for the rest of his life because of what he did to her. Now, if you're not allowed to marry her, so then you'd be exempt. So now here, in the case of arayis midrabanan, technically, from the doraisa perspective, from the Torah's perspective, he can marry her. Because there's no isser to this relationship. They're not related. They're allowed to stay married. So therefore, she would be eligible for a knas. So would the Chachamim then go ahead and say, hold on a second, but according to us, this is arayis, and therefore she shouldn't get a knas? Rabbanu wouldn't want to do that. They would not make a takana that would make her lose her money. So the Gemara says, Ella arayos, it must be, again, kiven d'midoraisa chazile, amai en leknas. Why wouldn't there be a knas? The Gemara says, Ella arayos, when we used the word arayos, we were describing chayave misos beistin, a relationship that would be punishable by death in a court of beistin. So in other words, in this world. Shnios, what are shnios? Those are relationships that are chayav krisos, that beistin can't put someone to death for, but the person's chayav karas for engaging in that relationship. Aval, however, chayav lavin, which are also asur midoraisa, yesh lahen knas, there is a knas. In other words, shnios is described. Both shnios and arayos are describing relationships that are asur midoraisa. So all these are asur midoraisa, but chayav lavin, that's where the exclusion is. That's where yesh lahen knas. Umani, whose opinion is this following? Shimon HaTimni. If you remember Shimon HaTimni on Daf Chavtes Amud Aleph, what did he say? He said that you don't actually have to have, the criteria is not that you're allowed to stay married to the woman. The criteria is that if you married her, the marriage would work. Now, it might be that you have to divorce her afterwards because it's a forbidden relationship, but technically the kiddushin would work, and that's true by chayav lavin. There are those who say arayos is chayav misos beistin, the chayav krisos and chayav krisos. What are shnios? Shnios is chayav lavin, and what are chayav lavin? Describing Mani Shimon ben Asihi. That's the opinion on Chavtes that disagreed with Shimon HaTimni, and he said the criteria is that you actually have to be able to be re'uya l'kaima. Not only the marriage works, but also that she's re'uya l'kaima, you can stay married to her. Okay, now the Gemara goes on. Hamima'enes ein laknas. Hamima'enes, again, is a ketana, a young girl who is married off by her father or by her brother, and she is mima'enes, she refuses the marriage, she walks out. So the Gemara says, if a person is ma'anes or mefate, a person forces this girl, violates her against her will, or seduces her, the halach is ein laknas. Ein lo loknas lo pitoy, there is no penalty, there's no financial penalty. Gemara says, hold on a second. It seems like what you're pointing out is that she's a mima'enes. In other words, that is the key point. The fact that she is mima'enes. Now, who is the mima'enes? Who does this describe? We just explained, a ketana, a young girl who could be married off in this circumstance. So the diuk, what we would derive from there is that it's only because that she's a mima'enes, and that's why there's no knas. Ha-ketana ba'alma, islay. If she was a ketana who was not a mima'enes, then there would be a knas. Again, because if a mima'enes is only someone who is a ketana, and you're choosing to highlight the fact that she is a mema'enes. She's refusing the marriage, so then that must be the point. Because if that wasn't the point, then just say there's no knas for a katana. So now it must be that you meant for a katana there is a knas, but for a mema'enes there isn't. Mani, whose opinion does that follow? Rabbanan, his Gemara says, must be the Rabbanan, to Amri katana yesh l'knas. It must follow the opinion of the Rabbanan who say that yes, our parak is called Elunairas, but Elunairas only comes to exclude someone who's older than a naira. The fine is not relevant to an adult, to a bogeres, but it's relevant to both a naira and a katana, to both a young girl under the age of 12 and a girl under the age of 12 and a half. But the problem, says the Gemara, if that's true, that our Brisa holds that there is a knas for a katana, a masefa. Let's read the end of this. Ailanis, a girl who can't have children. Ein lo knas lo pitoy. There's no knas and no pitoy. Asal Rameir. That follows the opinion of Rameir. To Amar, katana ein lo knas. V'hami katnusa yatsa labagar. In other words, what's the reason why an ailanis doesn't get a knas? It's because she has no stage of nairos, as we described. In other words, the problem with an ailanis, with a girl who can't have children, is we don't care about we care terribly about the fact that she can't have children, but that's not relevant to this fact. The relevance is that she does not have the halachic stage of maturity of nairos. She doesn't go into that period called being a naira. In other words, the problem with an ailanis, the reason why she doesn't get a knas, is because she skips the stage of being a naira. Now, what does that clearly indicate? It indicates that the stage beforehand, which is being a katana, and the stage afterwards, which is being a bogeres, both are ineligible for the financial penalty. So that clearly indicates that it's only a naira who gets the knas. That's clearly the opinion of Rameir. So how could it be that from one line to the next, the author of this brisa changes from the Chachamim to Rabbi Meir? Gemara says, Reisha Rabbanan, v'sefer Rabbi Meir. Can we have one statement, one brisa, one memra, which begins with Rabbanan, and then it just switches automatically in the beginning from the Rabbanan to Rabbi Meir? V'chite mekul Rabbi Meiri. Maybe we'll suggest that the whole thing is Rabbi Meir. Ubimema'enes savar Rabbi Yehuda, and there's an external opinion mixed in over here, which is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. What is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? It's an outside opinion, which is that a mima'enes can actually be a naira, that the period where she can storm out of this marriage extends even to being a naira. In other words, that we don't need to go ahead and make a diuk that it's only that the opposite of a mima'enes. In other words, the default would have been that she's a katana, because Rabbi Meir follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that indeed she can walk out as a naira. But the problem is that's just not true. Umi savarla, does he actually hold like that? Vatanya, we learned in a brayso masay habas mima'enes. Until what stage can a girl be ma'ain? Can she storm out of this marriage? Ad shetavish de'saris, until she brings 2 years of maturity, and that is the period of being a naira. Divi Rabbi Meir. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda is one who disagrees and says, Archi Yir B'Shachar Alavan. Not going to get into that sugya right now because it's a drop complicated. It was a sugya in Yevamos, but ultimately it describes a little bit more of an advanced stage of maturity. But clearly, the one who's arguing with Rabbi Yehuda is Rabbi Meir. And he says that the stage is Archi Tavish De'Saris. It means until she becomes a naira, once she becomes a naira, she can no longer do biyun. So therefore, we cannot have that brisa being Rabbi Meir and including the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, because we've got news for you. Rabbi Meir doesn't agree with Rabbi Yehuda. Ella, it must be Rabbi Yehuda. It must be that this entire brisa is Rabbi Yehuda. Ubiketana savar lak Rabbi Meir, and he follows the opinion of Rabbi Meir that a ketana there is no knas, and therefore there's no knas by an ailanis. In other words, we're going to just say that this case of a mema'enes is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, which is referring to the period of even Iros, because that's Rabbi Yehuda. But when it comes to this one particular halacha over here by a ketana savala krameir. He holds like krameir that there's no knas. Okay, umi savala. Is that true? V'ha'amar Yehuda Amar Rav. Yehuda said the name of Rav Zudiv Rabbi Meir. This opinion follows the opinion of Rabbi Meir. V'im isa, if it's true that this brisa was actually said by Rabbi Yehuda, Zudiv Rabbi Meir of Rabbi Yehuda bin Bailei. Why are we specifying only that it's the opinion of Rabbi Meir? Add in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda as well. In other words, don't say Zudiv Rabbi Meir. Say Zudiv Rabbi Meir v'Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda is in agreement with this. So just to point out, if you look at Tosfos, in the Tosfos in Isa Zudiv Rabbi Meir, Tosfos goes through a number of different opinions over here, but ultimately Tosfos' question is, do we have to list everybody? In other words, we wanted to highlight that it was Rabbi Meir. Do we have to list that it's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda as well? So Tosfos says something which is actually very interesting. He says, no, you don't need to list everybody who agrees with this, because you could probably find hundreds of Tanaim who agreed with this. However, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda almost always disagreed with each other. And that's why he says, it's close to the end of Tosfos, El Mishun de Rabbi Yehuda bar plukta de Rabbi Meir, Levi Bechlal Chachamim de Pligi Alea, Ulahachi im Isa de Lo Paleg, Havle Lememer Zudiv Rabbi Meir Rabbi Yehuda. Since it's almost always assumed that when Rabbi Meir says something, Rabbi Yehuda is going to disagree. Therefore, if we find a case where they actually have the same opinion, highlight that. Say it. Let us know about it. Simply because I guess the assumption would have been that Yehuda disagrees. So if they're going to agree, point it out. But again, it's not necessary to list everybody who agrees every time you list an opinion. So the Gemara, now, in other words, we're still stuck here. We don't have anybody who can be the author of this brisa where it's going to be consistent. The Gemara says, Haitana Savala Rav Meir. The Gemara gives a simple solution and saying, you know what, this is, I guess, probably some type of mysterious Tana. We don't know who it is who wrote this brisa, but what he was doing was, he was following the opinion of Rabbi Meir in one case, and Yehuda in another case, and therefore it's not that the author of the brisa changes from one half to the next, but the Tana, the external Tana who wrote this brisa, he followed two different opinions. Rav from Omar, Mai Mima'enes, and Rafam says something fascinating. When it says Mima'enes, it doesn't actually mean a girl who was married off by her father and walked out. It just means somebody who's at the age that if she would have been married off by her father, she could have walked out. And who is that? That is a katana. So the Gemara says, okay, so why call her a Mima'enes? Listni katana. Don't beat around the bush. Just call her a child, and we'll know what you're talking about. Why do you have to call her a mima'enes? And then I have to review the whole Safta of Yavamas to remember who a mima'enes is, and then say, oh, you know what? There's two different opinions of when she could walk out. Is it Rabbi Meir? Is it Rabbi Yehuda? Is she a katana? Is she a naira? Oh, you know what? All I meant was that she was a katana. Just don't beat around the bush. Tell us a katana. You know what the Gemara answers? Kasha. It's a good question. Now, what does the Gemara mean when it says kasha? So we know that when the Gemara says kasha, it's different than when the Gemara says tiyufta. The Gemara says tiyufta, it means we have completely obliterated that answer. In other words, we have to retract in that answer. Kasha means it's a very good question, but we're still going to stick with that answer because there are a variety of explanations. And I saw the Rishonim actually bring down a number of explanations, but Tosfos over here actually addresses it, and he says, Mikol Makom, in the Tosfos for listening katana, Kasha Tosfos says, Mikol Makim Tani Nami Islandus Taviamina Dafka Katana Sheyesh Lenaris in Laknas. In other words, Tosfos is going to explain that there are some chidushim that can come out of the fact that we're calling her Mima'enes instead of calling her a katana, similar to the same thing we do with islandus. But again, the bottom line is the Gemara is not retracting from the answer of Rav. From the Gemara is saying there is a technical difficulty over here, and we're not going to deal with it right now in the Gemara, but the answer still sticks. Okay, the Gemara goes on and says, "Islandus, an islandus ein la lo knas lo pituin." An islandus again is a girl who can't have any children, and she skips the stage of nairus. The Gemara says, "Hold on for a minute. This is a problem. This is a stira. Why? Because we have another brisa which says hachareshes v'hashota Chareshes is a deaf mute, v'ashota, and a girl who is insane, v'ha'ailanus, and an ailanus, a girl who can't have any children, yesh lahen knas, v'yesh lahen tainas besulim. So here we have very clear, it says, yesh lahen knas. There clearly is a statement over here that there is a knas. So we have a stira. The Gemara says, v'hai mai rumya. Why are you asking you this question? How Rabbi Meir? The first one is referring to the opinion of Rabbi Meir. What does he say? He says, a ketana does not get a knas, and therefore an ailanus doesn't get a knas because she skips the stage of being a naira. The other opinion is like the Rabbana that we mentioned just a few minutes ago, that is of the opinion that a ketana does have a knas. So in other words, it's not a stira. You can only ask a stira if you have someone's name attached to a brisa. The fact that you have two different brisas doesn't indicate that there's a stira. They're different authors to the brisa. So the Gemara does not have a stira now. We started off with a brisa at the beginning which says an ailanus does not have a knas. Now we're quoting a brisa that says an ailanus does have a knas. That is not a contradiction. It's just two different opinions. The Gemara says with the karila, my karila. This is such a good answer to the stira. What were you even thinking when you asked the question? When you mentioned this other brisa, why was that even a problem? Why did you even think to ask that as a question? The Gemara says, the truth is, we weren't really so much motivated by the fact that there was a stira with regard to this ailanus. Rather, we were motivated mishum de islay lemirma achriti ilve. There's really another much stronger question to be asked about that, which is hachareshes v'hashota v'habogeres. Chareshes, a deaf mute, hashota, someone who is insane, v'habogeres, and an adult, a girl who's an adult, mukas eitz, and a girl who was mukas eitz, she lost her basulim not by way of a bia, but rather by way of something else. Ein lahen tainas basulim. There are no tainas basulim. In other words, if a person marries any of these girls and discovers on the first night of marriage that she is not a basula, the halacha is he cannot go ahead and take her to Beis Din and claim that he wants out because she's not a basula. In other words, he should have understood that there's a very real possibility that any of these girls are not going to be a basula. I'm going to explain all these cases as we go further. But the problem is, it says clearly, Ein lahen tainas basulin. But if you go just a few lines up on Chareshes and Shota, v'yesh lahen tainas basulim. In other words, the issue that we're struggling with over here is not really the issue of whether or not there is a knas for somebody who violates her. The problem is we seem to have a stira about the fact, can a person go to Beis Din and claim that I married this girl under the pretense that she was a basula, and I discovered after marriage that she wasn't. Gemara seems to say in one place that a charesh, a deaf mute, there are tainas basulim. The same thing is true with a shota, that there are tainas basulim, but here it seems to indicate very clearly the chareshes and shota, along with the list of bogeres mukas eitz, there are no tainas basulim. So which one is it? The Gemara goes on. Hasuma v'ailanus yesh lam tainas basulim. A suma, a blind girl, of ailanus, and a girl who can't have children, yesh lam tainas basulim. If a person decides to marry any of these women, the halacha is he can't take her to Beis Din if he discovers that there are no basulim. Sumchas omer, Sumchas says mishum Rab Meir, suma ein la tainas basulim. If a person marries a blind girl, then he cannot take her to Beis Din after the marriage, claiming that she did not have basulim. He should have assumed that she does not have basulim. We'll get to explaining this very soon. Amar of Sheishas. So now, getting to that stira, when it comes to a chareshes, a deaf mute, and a shota, are there tainas basulim or not? Gemara says in Risheshus Lokasha, Harab and Gamliel for Harab Yeshua. If you remember in the last parak, we had extensive discussions about whether or not a girl is believed to give an explanation about when she engaged in this relationship where she lost her basulim. In other words, if a girl says, Misharas Tani Ne'anasti, after we did Erisin, I was violated by somebody against my will, is she believed or not? And Gamliel says yes. Yeshua said, Lo mepia anuchayin, we do not believe her. So this Gemara, ultimately, these two brises are going according to those different opinions. The brisa that says yesh lehen tainas besulin, is following the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua that she is not believed, and therefore he can get out of the marriage by saying she's not a besulin, she's not believed to say it happened b'ones. The opinion that says that there's ein lan tainas besulim is following the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel that she is believed. But hold on a second, the Gemara says, Eimer d'shamas leil Rabbi Gamliel, maybe the only time we've heard that Rabbi Gamliel says that she's ne'emenes is hecha dikatana ihi. That's only when she actually voices her opinion and says, yes, it's true that I'm not a basula, but that's because I can explain it to you. After Erison, I had this unfortunate circumstance where I was forced into this relationship. But in a case where she does not say anything, Mishamet lei, are you going to tell me that we're going to believe her that she was violated against her will after Erison when she didn't say anything? In other words, Gamliel says the Gemara is only relevant if she speaks up and says, I was violated after we did Erison. Says Gamliel will believe her. But here she didn't say anything. She's not claiming that she was violated after Erison. Gemara says yes. In Kivan Amar Gamliel Mehemna, since Gamliel gives her a valid claim that she would be believed for if she would say it, Kigon Zu, in a case like this, where she is a chareshes, she can't speak. Or she was a shota. She doesn't have enough das, enough depth of understanding to be able to come up with this claim, Psach Pichal Ilemhu. We are going to provide a voice to the voiceless. So the Beis Din actually is going to make the claim on her behalf. Even though she says nothing, the Beis Din will say, you know what, it must be that she was violated after Erison, and therefore we're going to believe her for that claim that she actually never made. We'll make the claim for her, and the opinion that says Yesh Lentainas Besulin is Rav Yehuda, where she's not believed. The opinion that says Ein Lentainas Besulin is following Rabbi Gamliel, even though she doesn't actually make the claim, will make the claim on her behalf. Kind of running out of time, but this is actually a fascinating sugya to determine when is it that a Beis Din will lead a person on to making a claim. We know that when it comes to Yisomim, children, orphans who lost a parent, there's a concept called ta'inin an lei. The Beis Din is always going to give them the best possible claim to help them win a case. In this case, this is not a yasom. This is somebody who's unfortunately in a bad circumstance because she doesn't know what to say. She doesn't have enough depth of understanding or the ability to speak. So the Beis Din gives the claim. There's a fine line that's walked when the dayanim actually lead people on to making claims. To go too far, it could be, as the Mishnah writes, as ka'arche hadayanim, which is really corrupt judges. So again, there's a fine line to walk, but clearly this is one of the cases where we'd say psach pichel ilaim, which is a pasuk in Mishlei, which means literally psach pichel ilaim means be a voice for the voiceless. In this case, this is one of those cases where we recognize a chareshes and a shota are not able to speak and to actually verbalize what their rights are, and therefore we do it on their behalf. The Gemara continues. Habogeres ein la tainas besulim. A bogeres, an adult girl, if a person marries her and discovers that she's not a besula, then the halach is he cannot go to Beis Din and say, hold on a second, I married this girl under the pretenses that she was a besula and she's not. He should have assumed that she would not be a besula when they get married. The Gemara says, hold on a second. V'ha'amar Rav said, bogeres nosnin la Laila Harishon. We give her the first night completely scot-free. What does that mean? The halacha is, it's important to point this out because this is not actually how we're noeg. Dam nida and dam ziva make a woman tameya and she has to go to the mikvah. While a woman is tameya, she's obviously asur labaila. But dam nida needs to be dam nida and dam ziva needs to be dam ziva, which is menstrual bleeding. Dam besulim, for all intents and purposes, we can call it dam maka. This has that blood that comes out when a woman is penetrated for the first time is not dam nida, and therefore it should not be metame. So the Gemara says when a person marries a bogeres, the entire first night that they're married, any blood that comes out, we're just going to excuse that as dam besulim. Now lamaisa, the way we're knowing now, the way we paskin is that not only are dam besulim metame, but even if we don't necessarily see blood, but if there is a gemar bia, we assume there is blood. So we're very machmir on this lahalacha, but from the strict point of the Mishnah, what it's saying is that a bogeres, the first night, any blood which is found, we completely excuse it as dam besulim. In other words, we don't even suspect that it's dam nida, because it's so prevalent that there's going to be blood that will come out on the first night. So therefore, for a bogeres, all blood that comes out on the first night is immediately excused as dam besulim, and it's no problem of nida or ziva. What does that clearly say? That clearly seems to indicate that we expect her to be a besula, as a bogeres. So the Gemara says, yes, you're right. Ida katon tainis damim, if his claim is that a claim of blood, hachanami. You're right. Hachabamayskinan, what do we? In other words, if he claimed that there was no blood, he would be believed because we expect there to be blood. However, hachanami, hachabamayskinan, what are we talking about over here? The katoin tanis pasa pasuach. He's not claiming that he didn't find blood, and Rashi says, I think I saw it in Rashi. Yeah, the dam lo badakti imnim solo. In other words, he wasn't paying attention. He didn't pay attention to the blood. In other words, his claim is, when they ask him, did he find blood? He says, I don't know. I didn't notice that. What's his claim? His claim is that the Pesach was open too much, which is like we saw in Daf Tes, Pesach Pasuach Matzasi. He says there wasn't enough resistance, and therefore, that's his claim. When it comes to that being the claim, the Gemara says, Ein la tainus besulim. That's not a good taina. Why? Because her body matured already. As her body matured, it's very possible that her body matured enough to the point where there was much less resistance. So in other words, what we're coming out from here is, a bogeres, we expect her to still have dam besulim, but we don't expect there to be resistance. And therefore, if his claim is, I didn't find any blood, then he would be believed, and that would be a valid taina of tainus besulim, that I expected to find blood. If his claim is that I expected it to be much more resistance, we will tell him, I'm sorry, you married an adult, as Rashi writes, the last words in the Rashi of the first Rashi on the page, Misha bagra ein rach matzar ki batchila v'doma lo ki ilu pesach pasuach. He'll think that it's pesach pasuach, but again, she's an adult. As she grows up, there's going to be much less resistance. The Gemara continues. Sumcha omer shir Meir. Sumcha says the name of Rabbi Meir, Suma ein la tainus besulim. A person marries a blind girl, there are not going to be tainus besulim. In other words, he cannot claim that I married her expecting her to be a besula, but she wasn't. The Gemara says, my time at the sumchas, why not? What does being blind have to do with anything? The Gemara says, Amri b'zeira, b'pnei shenechbetes l'gabe karka. She can't see where she's going, so she constantly falls. It's very possible that by way of the trauma from falling all the time, she will no longer have any besulim. The Gemara says, come on, give me a break. All kids fall. Play tackle football. Everyone's playing. Kids are running around. Kids play sports. Kids always fall. You don't need to be blind to fall. So everyone falls. The Gemara says, you are right. It's true. Everyone falls. And we're not saying that blind people fall any more or less than anybody else. The problem just is, when anybody else falls, kulu ro'os umaros le'iman. A typical girl who falls down and starts bleeding, what does she do? She runs to her mother and says, Mom, look what happened, I'm bleeding. So if indeed she fell and there would be a trauma that affects her besulim, it would be something that would be known about because she would have showed it to her mother. Zu einaroa, she can't see it, she doesn't know what's happening, therefore ve'enamar le'ima, she can't show it to her mother. Okay, so Simcha has some type of explanation as to why a blind girl will be different. It has nothing to do with whether or not she falls. Everybody falls, it just has to do with whether or not she noticed that she lost her basulim by way of some trauma, and therefore we wouldn't know about it because she couldn't tell. All right. A girl who goes out because of shem ra, there's no knas and no pitoy. The Gemara says, she gets skila. Now what's the Gemara's question? It's important to look at Tosas over here. we're not bothered by the fact that she's getting skila and we're saying kamli b'drabimine. We're just saying, Tosfos points out, upshita delav bas knasi da ba'ulahi. In other words, it's just if she's getting skila because of the fact that she was mizana while she was already married, so then the problem is that she was mizana. She's a ba'ula. And therefore, of course, there's no knas. Amar b'sheish hachi ka'amar. Mi sheyatza alea shem rabbi al dusa ein lo knas lo pitu. A girl who bad rumors were spread about her when she was a child, she becomes disqualified from the knas. Amar Rav Papa. Shma mina. Learn from here. Hai shtara reya. If you have a star, which I guess the right word would be it has some questions about it. Has a questions about its validity. Lo magbin bay, you can't use it to claim any money. So Gemara says, hey chidami. What are we talking about here? If you're telling me that what happened over here is that the rumor went out, that there's a rumor, people are hawking, there's gossip. People are saying, oh, you know what, that star that guy has, it's a forgery. So then, then the kava sahacha, what would be the parallel case by this girl is the nafak alea kala dezanai. There's a rumor about her that she was mizana. Gemara says, "V'amarava yatzal Hashem mizana be'ir ein choshin la." Don't listen to gossip because a rumor went out. Just because there's a rumor that went out, this girl's mizana, it's none of anybody's business. That doesn't actually turn her into a zona just because people are talking about it. You have to have a little bit more evidence than that. The fact that there's a rumor. The Gemara says, Ella de asu beitrei, two people came, v'amri lididhu tavat nehi bisura. What are we talking about? We're talking about a case where two people say, we don't just have a rumor that this girl was mizana. We were approached by this girl. She asked us for znus. In other words, we know that she was soliciting znus, and therefore we say, we'll get to that in a second. And the kava sahacha, the parallel case here by the star is to asu beitrei, to Edom came va'amri, and they said who amar lahu zaifali. This guy came over to us and asked us if we can falsely sign on the star. So in other words, it's much stronger evidence that she was mizana. Why? Because she approached us asking us for znus, or the forger of the star approached us and asked us to sign falsely. So Gemara says, when it comes to someone who's being mizana, all right, you know what the reality is? That she'll find somebody. There are enough people out there, if she goes to solicit people for znus, she'll find somebody because there are enough prutzim out there. But people really have nothing to gain by signing on a star falsely. Just think of it like, all right, so a person could find themselves tempted to fall prey to someone who's soliciting them for znus. But why would someone sign a star falsely? For what reason? What do they gain from that? Gemara says that we don't actually assume people sign the star falsly. Rather, since he's looking for people to help him forge the star, if he went so far to go public and tell people, you know what, could you please help me forge this star? If he doesn't find anybody, you know what he'll do? He'll do the whole thing himself. You don't need help with it. You could write this star, you could forge people's signatures. But again, when it comes to znus, you actually have to have another party involved. So therefore, the fact that there are prutzim in this world, there are enough prutzim in this world who are willing to go along with it, and therefore, when we say that Yatsa Allah Hashem Ra, what it means is not just that there was some type of rumor floating around that she went around and asked people for, that there's a rumor going around that she had znus. Rather, when you're talking about a girl who was Motzi Allah Hashem Ra, it's talking about a girl where there is evidence, there's edus, there's testimony that she went around soliciting people for znus. Let's go a little bit further, just a couple more minutes. The Mishnah continues. The first Mishnah was Elu Narashi, Knas, Elu Shein Knas. The following are girls who do not have a Knas. Habal Giyores, somebody who is on a Giyores, on a convert, Bala Shvuya, and on a girl who's held captive, Bala Shivcha, and a maidservant. One of the sheniftu v'shenisgayu v'shenishtachru. If she was redeemed, she converted, or she was freed. Yeseros alpanos shaloshan v'yom echad. Older than 3 years and 1 day. In other words, they're past that period of time when we'll say the besulim will grow back. So therefore, we assume her to be a zona, and therefore there is no tainus besulim. Yehuda Omer shavuya sheniftas harei b'ktushasa. Yehuda says when it comes to a shavuya, the fact that she was older than 3 doesn't affect her, and we still assume that she is going to be b'ktushasa. She could, and again, we don't have that much time to talk about this. But essentially, Tosafos points out that midoraisa we don't assume her to be a ba'ula. It's only midrabanan. Afal pi shegdola, even though she's a gedola. Habal bito. Person is bal bito, has a relationship with his child. Abbas bito, a granddaughter. Abbas beno, a granddaughter from her son. Abbas ishto, his wife's daughter. Abbas bena, the daughter of her son. Abbas bito, the daughter of her daughter. Ein lohen knas. Well, there's no knas. Why? Because of commonly b'derabba the person's chayiv misa for those relationships. Shemisasan bidei beistin will execute this person. A person's chayiv misa by beistin. Ein mishali mammon does not pay mammon. Why? Shnemar v'mlo ye'ason. We spent a lot of time on this in the past couple dafim, that when there's a chayiv of misa, there is no monetary payment. Let's just go a little bit further. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Dosa, Amr Davrecha. Yehuda and Rabbi Dosa said the same thing. Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah said that a shvuya past the age of 3 is still going to be b'ktushasa. Yehuda hada amaran, he's who the person who we quoted. Rabbi Dosa, who's Rabbi Dosa? Titania, for we learned in a brayse, a shvuya, a captive girl. Ochelas b'truma, she can't eat truma. Div Rabbi Dosa. So clearly we're allowing her to eat truma. That means that we're assuming she was not violated. Rabbi Dosa, Titania shvuya ochelas b'truma. Div Rabbi Dosa. Rabbi Dosa v'chimas, and he's explaining. Rabbi Dosa v'chima asala aravai halaz. What did this Arab do to her already? Why does the Gemara use the term aravai? Because the Gemara in Kedushin says that Arabs have taken 9/10 of all znus in this world. So therefore, just because he was fooling around with her, bein dadea, pasum in kuna. Again, the Gemara is not minimizing what happens when somebody is harassed like this, but again, it does not turn her into a ba'ula. It's something which is terribly harassing and carries a lot of trauma with it, but it does not ruin her. Amarabo dilma lohi. Maybe this is not true. Ad kan lo kam Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda only said his halacha hacha el shlohi hechot in iskar. Yehuda is talking about a case, we don't want it to be chot in iskar. She was held captive, and therefore, the person who's going to violate her is going to get out of a knas. In other words, when it comes to knas, Yehuda says, all right, we'll still give her the knas. Aval hasam, krabanan sirle, maybe when it comes to that case of truma, he would hold like the rabbanan. Inami, maybe the opposite. Ad kan lo kam Rab Dosa hasam, ella bitruma drabanan. Rab Dosa was only allowing her to eat truma because it was nisr midrabanan. Aval knas, when it comes to a knas, which is doraisa, she is technically midoraisa eligible to this knas, maybe krabanon sirle. Okay, we'll have to stop here at 6:45. But everyone have a wonderful day. Again, it's supposed to be able to learn with everybody. Hashem, the Rav will be back tomorrow. And again, come to Akiva Kovacs asked me to remind everybody, we mean a tremendous amount to him if you could participate in the bris at 7:45 this morning at Rabbi Golfez's shul. Have a wonderful day.